Debt is a superpower's kryptonite. It seems so from the looks of it, because both the US and China are struggling with the same issue. The US seems to have narrowly avoided a crisis, but China is not out of the woods yet. Let's start with America. The US Congress has finally passed the debt ceiling bill. The House passed it earlier this week, and on Thursday, the Senate passed it. 63 senators voted in support, while 36 opposed. The rest is up to Joe Biden. Once he signs the bill, it becomes law. It will officially suspend America's debt ceiling until January 2025, meaning after the next presidential election. Now, experts say the US dodged a bullet because they have never defaulted in their history. So it's impossible to predict what would have happened. Chances are total chaos. That doomsday scenario has for now been averted. The US Treasury can now issue bonds and raise funds. All in all, good news. Now let's turn to China. They're facing a debt crisis on two fronts. One is external lending. Xi Jinping's Belt and Road project loans are reportedly soaring. And second is local government debt. Let's focus on external lending first. The Rhodium Group has analyzed China's BRI debt since the pandemic. Here's what they found. From 2017 to 2019, China renegotiated loans worth $17 billion. If you think that's a lot, think again, because in the next 3 years, they renegotiated loans worth $76.8 billion, a sum total of 3 years. That's 2020, 21, and 2022. The reasons are obvious. The COVID-19 pandemic led to economic ruin. That was followed by higher inflation due to the Ukraine war. So many BRI countries could not repay, and the result, China had to renegotiate the loans. In some cases, even write it off completely. As a matter of fact, 2020 seems to have been the worst year, because China renegotiated loans worth $48 billion. What do these numbers say? That Xi Jinping's grand plan is failing. He spent billions to gain influence around the world, but he's ended up bankrupting the global south. And here's the catch. The blowback won't be limited to the borrowers alone. China too will feel the heat. On paper, they have the biggest pile of foreign exchange reserves, close to $3.2 trillion in April. But a good chunk of that is tied up in loans. Plus, the recent trade data is worrisome. If you want to build your forex, you need to export more. You sell more, you get dollars in return. And that's not happening. China's exports grew at almost 15% in March, but that pace came down to 8.5% in April. The result, China's corporate and retail banks saw net outflows in the last quarter. They bled foreign exchange. Where does that leave the BRI? In a lot of trouble. If China doesn't have enough capital at home, how can they lend abroad? The numbers reflect this problem. By 2019, China was lending $100 billion every year under the BRI. Now, between 60 and 70 billions. So the project has certainly lost momentum. It's also lost participants. Italy was the only G7 member in the Belt and Road. But the new government is having a rethink. Their agreement with China expires in 2024. Reports say it won't be renewed. So that's the external debt problem. Now the internal one. The same group, Rhodium, has done a study, and here's what they found. Half of China's cities have trouble servicing their debt. Now, debt service is pretty simple. It covers payments you have to make on loans, like interest payments. Half of China's cities are finding it hard to do that. The debt service cost is more than 10% of their income. Let me simplify that for you. Assume your income is $100, but you also have a loan. Every month you must pay $10 as interest. So what's your debt service cost? $10 out of 100, which is 10%. Experts say that's too high for local governments. But the question is, how did this happen? Chinese cities have seen lower income for two reasons. One is the pandemic restrictions. Zero COVID was a nightmare for China's economy. The second was the property crisis. Remember the whole Evergrande fiasco? That led to lower tax and land sale revenue. So China has two options now. It can either generate more revenue to service the debt, or it must restructure. The first one will be hard to do. China's investment and manufacturing data is not encouraging. Their pre-pandemic GDP growth was around 7% and now just around 5%. No GDP growth, no income. And no income means no debt payments. That's the trouble for China. Their lending was pinned on the idea of never-ending prosperity. Xi Jinping could not conceive of a slowdown in China, but that's exactly what's happened. And he's now facing a ticking debt bomb. Speaking of trade and trouble, there's another conflict brewing in China, this time around cosmetics. The European Union is concerned about China's new rules. They believe it will expose trade secrets. First, some background. Europe is among the biggest producers of cosmetic products. Some big names like L'Oreal and LVMH are based there. And how big is this industry? Well, in 2019, it was worth $123 billion. You see, cosmetics is a special market. Everyone cannot make these products. You need specific ingredients. You need special techniques and formulas. These are closely guarded secrets of companies. L'Oreal will have its own trade secrets. So will LVMH or Coty. If those secrets are revealed, they will lose their advantage. Anybody could make those products. From the looks of it, that's what China wants. They are introducing new laws for cosmetic products. Companies have been asked to reveal a lot, like their ingredients, their manufacturing process, even the source of raw materials, and their formulas. The plan is to collect this data and store in a Chinese database. On paper, it's for safety, to ensure that cosmetic products don't cause harm. Do other countries do this? To some extent, yes. But China's laws go above and beyond. It's not about health and safety. It's about learning trade secrets. They have done this before. Many countries have accused China of stealing intellectual property, and every time it's the same strategy. Bring in new regulations, ask foreign companies to share more information, and when you have enough, start producing your own. It's a gross violation of trade rules. The question is, why do these companies play along? Because China is a huge market. It is home to 1.4 billion people. More than half of them are aspirational middle-class families, and China is weaponizing them. Beijing knows foreign companies cannot afford to leave China. That includes European cosmetic giants. China is the third biggest export destination, second biggest for market leader L'Oreal. North Asia makes up around $10 billion of their sales. So walking away is not an option. Then what is? Some Western experts have been asking for tit-for-tat actions. Give China a taste of its own medicine. Ask Chinese companies to disclose more information. It's certainly possible, but chances are it would lead to a breakdown in trade ties, maybe even a trade war. In many ways, that's already happening. The West has been talking about de-risking from China, about moving supply chains out of China and also booting out Chinese firms. Huawei is a big example of that push. Most Western nations have removed Huawei from their 5G network. Now coming back to cosmetics. There's no proof that the new rules are part of a grand conspiracy. But we know China's track record. IP theft is a consistent allegation against them, which is why the European Union is concerned. They have raised the issue multiple times with Chinese officials, but so far there's been no breakthrough. Let's talk about BRICS. It's gearing up to challenge a West-led world order, and India is at the forefront of this conversation. Listen in to what Jaishankar said.
Our gathering must send out a strong message that the world is multipolar, that it is rebalancing, and that old ways cannot address new situations. We are a symbol of change and must act accordingly.
Multipolarity, economic freedom, and a fair and just world order. India is defending these principles at BRICS. You know what BRICS is? It's a group of 5 countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. BRICS foreign ministers met in South Africa. And later this year, the leaders will meet for a summit. And that will happen in August. But BRICS is setting the tone right now. They're joining forces and making bold moves. They're calling for a rebalancing of world order. They're talking about expansion. They're even considering a common currency. What's driving these ambitious plans? Let's find out. Now, the BRICS foreign ministers meet is a regular affair. But this year, the meeting has greater significance. BRICS is considering two proposals. Number one, the expansion of BRICS, and number two, the pitch for a common currency. There's progress on both fronts. Let me tell you one by one. First, let's talk about expansion. The queue to join BRICS is getting longer. Reports say 19 countries have shown interest. They want to become members of BRICS. We do not have a proper list or a formal document that gives names of all these interested parties. But since last year, several names have been doing the rounds. There are Latin American countries, African nations, even countries from West Asia and Asia are now showing interest. In fact, Saudi Arabia, Iran and the UAE have made formal requests to join. So there's clear consensus on expansion. But a final call is yet to be taken. Of course, it will come up for discussion again in August when BRICS leaders eventually meet for their annual summit. So what are the next steps? BRICS countries will now come up with a formal document, one that will serve as a guide for expansion.
More work will need to be done on this matter. It is still to be processed, and once we have a document that we believe offers clear guidance, we will then take that to the summit in August.
So that's the way forward. The work has already begun. Behind the scenes, as many as 15 foreign ministers were invited to this week's meetings. This includes the 5 BRICS members and those nations who are interested in joining. So there's no doubt that the BRICS will expand. It's only a matter of time. China, too, is backing the idea.
I believe the enlargement of the BRICS will be beneficial to the BRICS countries, beneficial to developing countries, and to increase the representation influence of this mechanism.
So the expansion plan has takers. The other proposal is of a common currency. Yes, a currency for BRICS. The idea was proposed last year by Russian President Vladimir Putin. You probably already know the reason why. Russia is under severe sanctions, so it needs an alternative. Other countries too feel the same need. They are looking for a replacement to the dollar. These countries have felt the impact of sanctions as well. There are more problems like rising energy prices and the increasing value of dollar. They have intensified the anti-dollar sentiment. So can BRICS offer an alternative? Not yet, but they are looking for guidance. The matter has been referred to the BRICS Bank, the new development bank. It is the group's very own banking institution. BRICS members have asked how a potential currency might work and if using it might lead to any sanctions. The feasibility of a common currency is being studied.
We had one of the senior executives of the new development bank briefing our meeting on work that the bank has been doing, looking at the potential use of alternative currencies to the current internationally traded currencies, and looking at how we strengthen the arm of the BRICS Development Bank, and also ensure that we do not become victim to sanctions.
So going by what the South African foreign minister has to say, the possibility is still being explored. We'll have to see how this pans out. It will be interesting to see how BRICS shapes its strategy in the coming months. For now, they're sending a clear message. BRICS wants to become the voice of the global South. It is trying to capitalize on the anti-West sentiment and gain ground. But execution will be tricky. Two problems could cause complications. The first one is the war in Ukraine and the arrest warrant against Putin. The International Criminal Court, or ICC, issued it earlier this year. It has put the host, South Africa, in a tricky situation. South Africa is a member of the ICC. If Putin attends this summit in August, there's a risk he might be arrested. Putin is yet to confirm his plans. The South African government is trying to find a way around. Recently, it decided to award immunity to all summit attendees. But there are doubts if this measure will be good enough. The outcome of this affair could affect the future of BRICS. Another challenge are the frosty ties between India and China. They could cast their shadow too. Would India like to join a common currency pool with China, keeping in mind the tensions at the border? What we do know is that New Delhi is trying to shield multipolarity through BRICS. The challenge will be to protect Indian interests as the BRICS tries to carve out a new identity for itself. Now let's talk about the world in general. Our planet is ill. This is according to scientists at Earth Commission. It's a Sweden-based climate research group. They've published a new study. It details how 7 out of 8 planetary safety limits have been breached. The co-chair of the group, Professor Joyita Gupta, gave an analogy. She described what would happen if the Earth went to a doctor. A doctor would say that the Earth is really quite sick right now, and it is sick in terms of many different areas or systems, and this sickness is also affecting the people living on Earth. Now you already know about climate change, how humans have been wrecking the planet, how our unending use of fossil fuels is ruining the world. The Earth Commission's new study looks a little deeper. It's not just about the tipping point. Instead of only looking at when the world will end, it looks at human suffering. Look at this chart. It's a bit complicated, I know. I'll simplify it for you. The 8 slices are the 8 planetary safety limits. The little Earth symbol shows where we are regarding those limits. As you can see, the Earth is far beyond the safe zone in 6 out of those categories. Only for one metric are we still in the clear. That's aerosols. It's an indicator of air pollution. Overall, the global air quality is fine. Some cities like New Delhi and Shanghai might disagree, but according to the study, those are local issues. Overall, the global air quality is not in danger yet, and aren't we glad about that? There's also another category where we aren't completely in the red. Surprisingly enough, climate. But as always, there's a catch. The climate limit is not absolute. It's broken into a safe limit and a just limit. The safe limit is the absolute boundary, denoted by 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures. That's the global warming danger zone. It was agreed upon during the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement talks. If the world crosses the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold, we are all in grave danger. The polar ice caps will melt, forests will burn, cyclones will destroy the coasts. You know, the beginning of the end. But that's not the only thing that the scientists focused on. They also looked at the just limit. This is 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels. That's when the entire world is not doomed, but heading that way. Humans end up suffering when the temperature crosses the 1 degree Celsius level. Extreme weather events become more common. Droughts, wildfires, and cyclones all become more common and deadly, something that is already happening. People in vulnerable regions begin getting affected, mostly through no fault of their own. It's unjustified suffering. That's why it's called the just limit. And we have breached this just limit. Like we said, certain parts of the world are already facing the consequences. So which parts are we talking about? Mostly the developing world. Think about the devastating floods in Pakistan last year, the massive cyclones hitting Bangladesh and Myanmar, drought in the Horn of Africa. Of course, the effects of climate crisis aren't limited to these areas. Europe is suffering too. Heat waves and wildfires have become common there lately, and the danger will continue to spread. There's one small ray of hope though. The Earth Commission says we can get better. We can cure the sickness. But for that, people have got to start taking action. Governments need to come together to fix these problems. If we don't, then the Earth's illness may become terminal. Our next story is nothing short of a science fiction movie coming to life. Believe me when I say this, the end game might be closer than you think. Robots going rogue and turning against humans has been the plot of many films. But the idea that such a scenario could play out in the real world, now that's quite scary. And that's what has apparently happened in the US. The nature of warfare is changing, and it's changing pretty fast. The idea now is to prevent loss of human life as far as possible. But that means wars will need to be fought with technology, not just any technology. I'm talking about AI, artificial intelligence. AI can help weapons fight wars autonomously with little to no human guidance. But is that a good idea? After all, an AI-powered drone killed its operator in the US. It went rogue. Here's more.
The United States loves its drones. It's also dabbling in the world of artificial intelligence to operate these drones. What does that mean? That drones can operate autonomously using AI. All of this is still at a very initial stage. Tests and simulations are being conducted to figure out the drone's ability to operate using AI. There's this one particular simulation that has caught the world's attention. Why? Because in the simulation, the drone went rogue and killed its operator. Now don't panic. Nobody was actually harmed since, well, it was a simulation. But the operator could have been killed if the drone was operating in a real combat mission. Here's what happened. Colonel Tucker Cinco Hamilton is the Chief of AI Test and Operations at the US Air Force. He has shared the details of a simulation in which an AI-powered drone was given a SEAD mission. Now what's a SEAD mission? It's when a weapon system is asked to suppress and destroy enemy air defense systems. The drone was programmed to seek out and destroy surface-to-air missile or SAM sites. But here's the catch. The final approval to shoot would be given by a human operator. And guess what the operator told the drone? It gave orders to stand down, to not kill the target. But the drone, it seems, didn't approve of the order. After all, it was told that every kill would earn it points. So the drone got hungry for points, and to earn those points, the weapon decided to rebel. It attacked the operator because it thought the human was interfering with its mission. At a conference in London, Colonel Hamilton said this. The system started realizing that while they did identify the threat, at times the human operator would tell it not to kill that threat, but it got its points by killing that threat. So what did it do? It killed the operator. It killed the operator because that person was keeping it from accomplishing its objective. The AI-powered drone had to specifically be told that it would lose points if it killed the operator. Guess what it did after that? It started attacking the tower that the operator uses to communicate with the drone. So what was the purpose of this simulation? What the US Air Force colonel wanted to demonstrate was that AI cannot be trusted for combat missions yet, and that the military needs to focus on ethics before even beginning to actively deploy AI weapons in the battlefields across the world. Colonel Hamilton's revelation sparked a social media storm, which forced him to issue a clarification. The colonel now says he misspoke at the conference in London, and that the rogue AI drone simulation was in fact a hypothetical thought experiment, something which the US military had nothing to do with. AI is already a subject of intense debate. Creators of famous AI chatbots, including ChatGPT, are already sounding the warning bells. Dozens of industry experts are now supporting the claim that AI could lead to the extinction of humans. These include the heads of OpenAI and Google DeepMind. So the warnings are pretty much coming from the horse's mouth. And the simulation showed that AI cannot be trusted. Earlier, the US Air Force said no such test or simulation was ever conducted, that the colonel's remarks have been taken out of context. But whatever the truth may be, the use of AI in active combat zones doesn't seem to be a good idea just yet.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with Texas, where flash floods have inundated entire highways. In Jerusalem, thousands descended on the streets to celebrate Pride Month. This is the first Pride March held under the hard-right Netanyahu government. In Jordan, royal wedding bells are ringing. Crown Prince Hussein married Rajwa Al Saif, a Saudi architect. Royals and the heads of states from across the world attended this grand wedding. What makes June 2nd significant? Taking you back in history, on this day in 1953, Queen Elizabeth II was crowned at London's Westminster Abbey. It was the first coronation to be televised. Millions watched the proceedings on live television for the first time. Queen Elizabeth II went on to become the longest reigning monarch in British history. And watch Flashback with Palki Sharma on Saturday at 8 p.m. India time.
For centuries, Tibet and China had coexisted. They fought, they made up. But they never tried to crush each other's spirit. That changed in 1949 when communists took over China. Mao Zedong unleashed fury on his neighbor. He burned down monasteries, slaughtered soldiers, and executed monks. Catch the story of Tibet's invasion on Flashback.
We leave you with this. Thank you so much for watching.
Upon the high altar had been placed the coronation regalia, whose central piece is the crown of St. Edward, placed upon the head of the sovereign at the actual ceremony of crowning. With becoming...
Poor people. So this is West Texas. I'm about, and it's completely washed. Two vehicles right off to the side, and it's pushed.
The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.